Now we are going to move on to our final presentation. Nick Smaligo with Food Autonomy.
Hello.
Ready, Nick?
Hi. Thank you all for being here and for sticking around. And it was, I thank everybody that's presented so far and really get a sense of kind of how much people are working kind of in parallel on all of these different things. And that's really exciting. I'm going to share my screen, and basically I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ideas and analyses that I'm coming from and talking with other people with, and then kind of take you on a little visual tour of some of the food autonomy projects that are currently going on. Hold on, let me ask a 7-year-old to quiet down real quick. Hello. I mean, I guess the first thing that I want to say, though, is that, you know, this is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And, you know, as many people know, Earth Day marked this kind of watershed moment where the kind of end of a lot of social struggles of the late 50s, 60s, and 60s, and then into the early 70s, there was this kind of shift, I think, in people's perceptions, where a lot of the struggles that had defined the revolutionary movements and the workers' movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they had a kind of pole where the struggle was between the proletariat, the workers, and the owners, the capitalists, the people that were exploiting people. And Earth Day marked the beginning of, or the kind of entry onto the scene of a new consciousness, that the struggles of our era are really about the conditions for life and maintaining the conditions for life. And sometimes those overlap with struggles of previous eras, but it's really a new shift which has deepened over the last generation or 2 generations since then. But also since then, things have been Am I back?
You're back.
Yep.
Okay. You're gonna have to bear with me for just a moment. I have to unclog my internet real quick.
I had to do this earlier at my household as well. Everyone is off the internet till further notice. Is everybody getting out and about today? Show of hands. Hands up.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Can someone give me a sense of when I cut out? Was it the line of tremendous failure? I'll just summarize my point really quick. And that was that since the first Earth Day, there has been more climate emissions than in all of human history combined. And this is a point made in The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, which a number of us read last month. And it's a really humbling point that knowledge about these problems does nothing to solve them. And that when we're trying to think about what it would mean to solve them, we can't think about, you know, spreading consciousness or something. I mean, that's important, but it actually does not translate into change. We have to talk about building power that has the capacity to stop this stuff. So having said that, I'm going to move into my presentation here. and share my screen. All right. So this little presentation is going to be called Food Autonomy in the Time of Corona. And the first point that I want to make is that things are rough already, and there's plenty of reason to believe that they will get rougher. And part of that has to do with just something about the nature of capitalism in relation to commodities like food, because in capitalism, food is a commodity, right? It's something that's to be bought and sold. And so this is just a quote from a recent NPR article. There's dozens of articles about this project, but this process that's going on. But I want to just point to something that's happening, and that is, in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Georgia, dairy farmers have been forced to dump thousands of gallons of milk that no one will buy. In Florida, vegetable growers are abandoning harvest-ready fields of tomatoes, squash, and cucumbers for the same reason. And then here's a quote from a grower. It says, we cannot pick the produce if we cannot sell it, because we cannot afford the payroll every week, says Kim Jamerson. Those crops will be plowed back into the field. We'll have to tear them up. And so a long time ago, when I was learning some things about the Great Depression, this was one of the things that really stuck in my mind and kind of horrified me, that there were stories of, on the one hand, people going hungry, and on the other hand, pig farmers slaughtering hundreds of thousands of pigs because they needed to drive the price up in the market in order to stabilize the market. And so it's literally insane. Right, and it's the same situation that we saw in the housing crisis a decade ago, where tens of thousands of people were kicked out of homes, not because there weren't enough homes, but because there were too many homes for people to make a profit off of them. And so this is something like insane about the logic of this thing that we call an economy, and a capitalist economy, is that it's not about directly meeting the needs of people at all. It's actually this horribly inefficient way of excluding people from those needs in order to make a profit off of them. And we're setting ourselves up, I haven't seen any good reason to believe that we're not headed toward a similar situation. And then on top of that, of course, even in the midst of the normal functioning of the food economy, thousands of people were going hungry in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, not to speak of all the people around the world that are going hungry. But also, the things that people are eating are generally of very low quality and nutrient content, and are tied up with this ecocidal machine of industrial agriculture and distribution, right? Where we're shipping food all over the world. We're using increasing amounts of pesticides, which are damaging the waterways and the soil. And the whole thing is not sustainable, even apart from climate change, but also climate change is adding to that, right? So we were in a huge mess of a crisis with our food system even before this. And then now this insane logic of the market is setting us up for an even bigger mess. The next point I want to make, though, is that crises like this catalyze substantial change. But unfortunately, that's generally not the kind of change we want. And the real classic articulation of this comes in Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, which if you haven't read, you absolutely need to read. Because basically what she outlines is the strategy of capitalists over the last 60 years, in which they have very consciously utilized crises to push through policies that otherwise nobody would have wanted or allowed to happen, that people would have organized against or stopped. But in the moment of a crisis, there's a kind of trauma, and people are demobilized. And so the ideas that are lying around, which them and their network of think tanks and stuff have made sure that they're lying around, can get forced through. And we see this happening. We see the Trump administration using this as a way to deepen their xenophobic border policies. We see it as a way to roll back environmental regulations. right? So there are mobilized groups of people who are utilizing this crisis to deepen policies or to push forward policies that will only deepen the inequities and deepen the ecological catastrophes that we are experiencing. And so what we need is another strategy that the rest of us can pursue. And I have been, along with other people, kind of calling that strategy a disaster communalism. You could call it whatever you want. But the idea is to take this same insight that was articulated in Naomi Klein's telling, articulated by Milton Friedman, one of the founders of free market economics of the last generation, and to recognize that disasters are moments in which change can happen, but that there needs to be a different set of ideas lying around so that those changes can actually create a more liberatory politics and a more ecological future. And so the way that I see disaster communalism is it's a combination of what mutual aid disaster relief, as Kurt spoke about, has been doing in an extraordinary way since Hurricane Katrina, and that is organizing communities for mutual aid responses, which tend to be more effective and certainly more liberatory than the responses of the state. But combining that also with a perspective articulated in this really wonderful book called The Subsistence Perspective by ecofeminists Maria Mies and Veronica Ben-Holt Thompson. And this was a book that I read a long time ago with Professor Sarah Lewison, and it just made a huge foundational effect on me. And basically what they talk about there is that they're exploring the perspective on what we call the economy that's articulated by indigenous women. And what they kind of outline is in contrast to economic values, they hold what they call subsistence values, and that is the direct production of the conditions of life, the means to produce life outside of the economy as a condition for political freedom. And that for me is undergirding a lot of what I do and what I try to advocate for. And of course, people all around the globe are engaged in this subsistence practices, but what our job is to make sure that in these disasters, those things get kind of hypercharged, that we expand those. And that means organizing for a different mode of life within the disaster and switching the kind of lens that we look at things. The way that I've been discussing it with people is a switch from the economic machine, in which things are linked together by their money relationships and by their ability to sustain this thing that we call the economy, in contrast to the care machine, in which those very same things are taken and linked in a different way. And that is not toward the production of profit, but toward the production, the meeting of immediate needs of people outside of concern for profit. And building the care machine, it doesn't mean that we're just like, oh, money's evil, we don't touch that. It's not like that, right? The idea is to use whatever means at our disposal, including money, to build the conditions for a life that doesn't center money in it.
Nick, we really have the living embodiment of these two different philosophies that we're living out day to day now, in this crisis.
Do you want to expand on that?
Well, just with the protesters that are fighting the social distancing,
Mm-hmm.
They're speaking completely from that voice of disaster capitalism.
And I would even say it's like they're like with so many things. There a lot of people like one of the things that the ideology of the economy does is it erases the existence of the possibility of life outside of it. So many of those people, right, are motivated by the fact that they truly believe, and practically things are organized, that they need to work, right? And if you tell them not to work, you're telling them to suffer.
Yeah.
And of course, there's all sorts of theories. There's all sorts of, rejection of science and these things that create a fertile condition for people to, believe that it's a conspiracy. They don't need to take it seriously. They don't respect scientific evidence and stuff like that. But they're motivated by the need to gain access to their conditions of life, and those things are wholly mediated by the economy right now. Mm-hmm. And so, what my wager is that in order to prevent those things escalating, we need to very rapidly start being able to point to the ability to reproduce life outside of the economy, and that's a good thing. And that doesn't mean the abolition of money. It just means pushing it from the center to the margins so that the conditions of life can be maintained outside of the economy. And this gets us into what we call food autonomy. And I want to say what we mean by that. And it starts from this recognition that both the market and the state are actually very inefficient at supplying people with healthy food. There's part of this, again, this ideology of the economy is that, markets are the most efficient ways to distribute things. That's just simply evidently not true when you live in the wealthiest and country in the history of the world that produces enough food on a planet, producing more food than anybody can possibly eat, but it's actually not getting to people that need it. Right. And that's because the way that they calculate and think about efficiency just is only looking at people who have the money to access it. But it's not looking at the bellies of people, the living reality of people and the needs that people have. It's looking at sales. And so currently, right, our access to food is dependent upon a fragile global capitalist supply chains, and we see their fragility in the midst of this pandemic, but also on the whims of federal government food assistance programs, which, blow whichever way, depending on who happens to be in office. And so food autonomy, born from those recognition, is the conviction that we have to produce food outside of both the market and the state in order to create a food social safety net rooted in regional production and regional relationships. And I want to say this concept of food autonomy is an ideal. It's not something that we're going to create this year, right? But it's something to guide our ventures and our organizing that as a long-term goal is something that we can measure our success against this ideal. So the Carbondale Spring Food Autonomy Program, which was part of the initial Carbondale Spring, strategy, if you want, or program, which we first launched about a year ago, we're advocating for municipal funding to produce food autonomy in the city of Carbondale. And over the past year, we've argued that this is a matter of public health and safety, and that funding currently devoted to the police department should be rerouted to actually pay people to build a food system in town. And I realize that this is like one of these contradictions. On the one hand, I'm saying we want to build things outside of the market. On the other hand, I'm saying we have to pay people to build these things. And part of that is just it's a strategic sacrifice that we know that people have costs. And this is something that's so important that we want to pay people to build something that will actually lower the costs of people's living overall, right? It will detract from people's necessary costs because we'll be producing an abundance of food here in town. And part of the reason why it's been so important for us to advocate for actually paying gardeners and farmers in town to do this work is we've seen a number of community garden projects run into problems with a shortage and inconsistency of volunteer labor. And that's not even really because people are flaky. Sometimes people have grand dreams because they have some free time, and then their economic circumstances change, and now they have to engage in wage labor and don't have time for the gardens. And so this is something that should be central enough in our value as a town that we should pay people to do this, just like we pay a city arborist to take care of the trees, just like we pay people to mow the lawns of vacant lots, which is generally not a great idea anyway. You know, but we have to switch our priorities and say this is it's important enough for us to build a food social safety net that we should be paying people to do that at a municipal level. But of course, over the course of the year, it became obvious that this was going to be a multi-year effort to get that city funding, and we're not about to wait for that. So what we've done, the folks involved in organizing for the Carbondale Spring Food Autonomy Program have built a coalition of community gardens on the northeast side, sharing labor and resources between the Washington Street Garden, the Red Hen Garden run by Women for Change, and the Attucks Community Farm located just south of the mosque that's owned by Attucks Community Services. And so we had already started this a few months ago, where we were beginning to collaborate among these different gardens in our planning and stuff like that. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And when it hit, we reached out to a local philanthropist, a guy named Peter Gregory, who agreed to help kickstart our food autonomy program and gave us a $23,000 grant to do this. And so the aim of this grant is to fund the needs, both material and labor, of as many gardens as we can, and to build about a dozen chicken coops in the backyards of Carbondale residents. And the condition of us building a coop in people's yards will be that they share eggs with their neighbors, because we want to take this concept of food autonomy. We want to do lots and lots of vegetables, but we also want to be growing toward producing protein here as well for people. So I'm going to take you on a little tour of some of the things here. This area here, this actually is a project of Libre, which is partnered with us on the Food Autonomy School, but it's a separate nonprofit, the Food Autonomy Program, but it's a separate nonprofit. And I just want to show it because it's a really cool project, and it's made possible by a grant from the Sierra Club, which Jane helped to get, but it's the Birch Street Food Forest. Right here in front here is an apple tree, and then there's about over 100 different fruit and nut-bearing trees here that were planted 2 years ago and are doing really great. And so this is right here on the northeast side of town. You see there's public housing projects in the background. And the process of building this was great. A whole lot of young kids got involved and are excited about it. And in the coming years, this is going to produce a lot of edible food for people that will be freely available outside of the market. A lot of these trees came through a project, which is also a Libre project called the Neighborhood Planting Project, which is done in collaboration with other cities throughout the Midwest. And last week, even in the midst of social distancing, you see people have their masks on, but we distributed hundreds of fruit and nut trees to people all around the region. This was a walnut tree, but there was about 12 different varieties of fruit, nut, and medicinal trees that were distributed to people. And we plan on continuing this project year after year. We've already given away a few thousand trees in the area. And then we have the garden stuff. This is our little backyard nursery here. These hoop houses are incubating probably a couple thousand plants that are going to be going to the various gardens around town. We've already distributed some of them, and we'll probably do another round of these. And then, so one of the first things that we did when we got this grant and started collaborating was deliver compost. This was a compost shipment gone awry to the Red Hen Garden. Mike from Revolution Recycling donated his truck. We got this compost. It's all composted horse manure from Rose O'Shannon Equine Farm. And as he was backing it in, the wheels sunk about 2 feet into the ground. So we ended up unloading it all by hand, and he got out without a scrape, which was really great. And now this is the Red Hen Garden is tremendous, the work that they've done over there. And so this is Kate waving in the foreground. Deb is watering flowers in the background. And Grant and Jacob, who I think are on this call, also have done a huge amount of work. Last year, I think maybe they did, I mean, really, they must last year, I think they did about a third or a quarter of what they're doing this year. And so this grant has already like helped to kickstart this massive expansion of this garden here. And it's a really beautiful process to see. They also have bees there set up by Scott Martin. And Scott wants to set up bees in some of the other gardens as well, which is great. I don't have any pictures of Washington Street Garden right now, but I hope people drive by there and see it. It's really, really beautiful. And there's a number of new people working on that too, who have organic farming experience. And so it's really coming together. Maybe I know that Dan's on the call. If you want to kind of jump in and say some things about the Washington Street Garden, that would be awesome. Sorry to blindside you there. You're welcome to not. You can jump in whenever. And then the next, and then this is the Addicts Community Farm, really. This is Valerie Mohammed in the foreground, who's the farm coordinator there. And then there's Hamza, Bilal, Mo, Grant, Jacob, and Lane are all working, shaping beds there. This plot of land had been used, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, but on a much smaller scale through Addicts Community Services. And then a good chunk of the grant is going to pay people to work there and grow what will hopefully be a huge amount of food available for distribution. Tom Grant, a local farmer and city council person, tilled this land up, and then people have been shaping it into beds, and it really just looks gorgeous. We do have a number of infrastructural needs that we didn't foresee that are coming up with this, partly because Imam Haq, who's one of the coordinators of this, had a deal with the local plumbers union where plumbers apprentices would come out and install a tap out there. But because of the pandemic, the plumbers apprentices are all, they're not doing that kind of work. They're just working online. And it's, so we don't have the money allotted in the grant to install this. And so I'm gonna ask y'all for money at the end of this. And then finally, so we've got the Red Hen Garden, the Washington Street Garden, Addicts Community Farm are all working in collaboration. And then we're also starting, this is on the south side of the Birch Street Food Forest, we're gonna start just a tiny little teaching garden here. This is Mahaji, who lives in the public housing there and is a forestry student and is just tremendously talented. She was actually planning on doing a gardening program with the Boys and Girls Club that was canceled because of the pandemic. And so she's gonna bottom line this teaching garden here. And so this is just yesterday, we put cardboard down to suppress the grass, and we're gonna mulch over it and put compost and build up beds here. And just yesterday working on this, there was about 6 or 7 kids that were all just like, what are y'all doing? You know, are you guys, because they had worked on the food forest with us, and they're very excited, and they know that this is their garden now. So I'm really, really excited from that. And then another thing that I'm very excited about is that we get to pay people, which is just like tremendous. And it felt just really gratifying to get to like write out all these checks to people for their labor, and just to be able to say like, we really value what you're doing. This is valued enough for you to be paid for it. And then the other aspect of the grant, in addition to supporting the building up of the vegetables, or the different community gardens, is our chicken coop stuff. And this is one aspect of the plan designed by a local architect who's on the call, Jessica Ali, who's helping to construct the chicken coops. This is after day 1 of our construction. This is just the base of the chicken coop. The first one, the prototype that we're building, which is in Dan's backyard. And after we create this one, hopefully we'll have a sense of how we can kind of create these very efficiently. And I think in the budget we have room for about 12 of them. And we've already placed an order for 120 chicks, which I'll be picking up in mid-May. And they're going to be taken care of in the first few weeks by some local farmer friends. And then we'll be distributing egg-laying hens to people, again, on the condition that they share with their neighbors. Dan, I saw that you are more available. Do you want to chime in either about the chicken coop or about the Washington Street Garden?
What specifically about the Washington Street Garden? Just what we got going on over there, or?
Yeah, I just didn't have a picture of it, and I was wondering if you could just say a little about what's happening.
Yeah, so we have, there's, I think, 15 beds total there, and we have half of them already planted with, various greens, beets, carrots, things like that. I know Leah has been talking about really building up a pollinator area this year that's very, bee and butterfly friendly. We do have some native species there already mixed in. We'll be expanding the planting plan with, all the other regular vegetables that you guys have started at your house. On the northern side of the garden, I think is something that a lot of people don't really know about or are educated in, that there's a lot of medicinal plants and other herbs and things there that have different purposes that Jessica's really been trying to educate people on. Yeah, some well-established fruit trees and raspberry bushes. We're looking to do another work day, I think, potentially Saturday. So we've been really getting some things going out there. In terms of the chicken coop, I'm just really excited to experience that and learn from, whoever I can about the actual raising of chickens and see what that experimentation is like with my little network of neighbors here and sharing the wealth, hopefully, that there is a lot of production out of that. And I think it will bring a focus into neighborhoods that don't necessarily have that communal connection with neighbors. I mean, I know my neighbors, we hardly ever see each other. It's, just kind of a wave through the backyard. So I think that in terms of it really expanding upon these, these ideas of mutual aid and connecting with those around you. So.
Thank you. And Jessica, do you wanna say anything about the chicken coop, the design, or the project as you're experiencing it so far?
Sure. So this chicken coop design is based on the minimum. It's interesting. The city has basically a maximum number of chickens allowed in the city limits, which is 6, but people who raise chickens generally know that the minimum number of chickens that are recommended to raise is 6. So we've designed I've designed a 6 chicken coop. It's the smallest house I've ever designed in my life. And what you were looking at, the plan that you're looking at here is actually on its side, so it's very illegible, but the photo that Nick had just before that is showing basically just the framing for the base of the coop itself. So the entire house that the chickens will live in will be above that, and then there will be a run in the foreground. This coop is designed really to provide for the comfort and well-being of the chickens. They're going to have nicer flooring than my own bathroom. So, and I don't know what else to add to that. This is what we're calling this coop here is the prototype. So as we build it, if there's things that need to be changed in the design will be worked out, reworked, and then the plans will be made available. And we intend to actually mass produce kits So we'll be doing all of our cutting all at the same time, and then producing kits that'll then be dropped off and assembled with the help of volunteers at people's respective properties. And trying to think of anything else to say. A lot of nuance to caring for and raising chickens, and but I think that people are excited. The people who are getting coops are really excited to have a protein source and some new friends in their lives. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting. And so we currently have 12 people signed up for Coops. And what we're gonna ask is, you know, for basically for folks to make donations for Coops that can range from 0 to the cost of the Coop, and whatever money we get from that will go to extend the project. So if we get more money, then we can do more Coops. So that's largely what's been going on with the Food Autonomy Project right now. And then I have some invitations about how you can help. Let me just, cool. So you can help by volunteering in the gardens. You know, we don't have enough to pay everybody, and we don't have enough to pay all the work that we need. And so we're paying some people. We're kind of basing that on need, but a lot of people have a lot more free time and are volunteering. And if you'd like to help volunteer in the gardens, probably the best person to contact is Chuck Paprocki. That's his email there. And Chuck can kind of put you on a list of the different gardeners and a list to be called to help out with things. We also need more donations or help with grants because as I mentioned, we need to install a tap at Addicts Farm, and we underestimated the costs of a deer fence there, which I think we're going to need. And so as things stand, we still need a couple $1,000s to really make sure we have the infrastructure in place there. And we currently have enough funds to fund the labor through mid-June, which is really exciting, but we'd like to extend that until August. And so, you know, as things progress, we'll be doing another fundraising effort. And if anybody wants to help with that, that would be really, really great. And then finally, we need help making media. Just if anybody wants to help produce videos, produce kind of social media posts about this, that would be great, just to spread the word about it. I want to kind of close with a question about like where all this goes and where we all go from this moment. And what I'm trying to propose is that in the midst of this crisis, we need to be building the city that we want. And we need to be preparing to fight against a reorganization of life that deepens inequities, authoritarian power, and the destruction of the earth. Because all things considered, that is the most likely thing that will happen. And it really will come down to the agency and action of, at first small and then large groups of people to push against that. And the framework that I propose for that is building the conditions of life outside of the economy here in Southern Illinois, which I think can dovetail very deeply with the other projects that we're talking about within the economy. But the orientation, and this was something that was articulated with that Bo and I had written about in the Carbondale Spring Cooperative business proposal, that we want to be building things within the economy that will allow for life outside of the economy. And that's really what building resilience has to mean for us. All right, I have a list. This is just a partial list of things people to thank. There's so many people to thank, so I'm just putting this up here for a moment, and then I'll just continue and grow it in future presentations. But that's all I have to say, and I think we have time for questions. I'd love to hear what y'all want to say, or what your questions are. Thank
Nick,
you.
Awesome. Thank you. Great pictures and great stuff going on there. Anybody got any questions? Quick ones maybe, because we can always have people talk to Nick in the breakout group if everybody still wants to do that. I'm assuming we do. Quick questions, anyone?
I wanted to ask, this is Jane Kogi, just to ask what is going to be planted in the Attucks Park, and is the tree project a separate project then?
Yeah, good question. So planted already are spinach, lettuce, potatoes, onions, chard, cabbage, collards, and sweet potatoes and beets. And we just put in another seed order, and we have a whole bunch of tomatoes and peppers and other things already in the hoop house. So
Right.
we're going to be planting all sorts of stuff.
Right.
As far as the tree project, so the neighborhood planting project, it's like, if you want, what our job, the Carbondale Spring Food Autonomy Project, is to promote food autonomy. It doesn't matter who's doing it, but there's obviously a lot of overlap between the neighborhood planting project and that, and that's run through the nonprofit Libre. It also so happens that this grant is being run through that nonprofit too, and there's just a lot of mixing of orientations toward the same goal here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I forgot to mention this, but Jacob and Grant are who are forestry students and are very involved in all of this, are also have put in a request to Attucks Community Services to use a portion of the Attucks farm as a tree nursery as well. And so we still have over 100 trees left over from the neighborhood planting project, and so we're going to try to take care of them and in pots there for future distribution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And how will the food distribution work within that larger garden? And the red hen, I guess, too.
Yeah, that's another thing I meant to mention that. So right now I'm focused on the infrastructure for the garden, and then my next range of focus is going to be coordinating with people who are already doing food distribution to figure out how to make a plan for this. We do have a line item in the budget for purchasing things to help with that, and so what my ideal would be is that we would kind of organize a local CSA around the gardens for people that live in them, and hopefully get them to volunteer for that. I suspect though that we're going to have much more produce than even that can distribute to, and so then we may coordinate either with local food pantries too to help distribute that.
Great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, Nick.